Right. Well, I shall start my introductions, and then if there are a few people join while I'm talking, that's fine. So, welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had a nice break. We are now moving on to our second keynote speaker, who is Monika Ardelt. And I'll tell you a little bit about Monika. Monika is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Florida. And what time is it in Florida at the moment, Monika?
It is now 9:01 a.m.
9:01.
And
All
I'm
righty.
a full professor, I just want to say, I did get eventually promoted.
Oh, no, that makes me feel bad. Sorry for the false advertising. I shall start again. Monika Ardelt is full professor at the sociology at the University of Florida. Her research interests include adult human development and aging and dying. For the last 25 years, she's been at the cutting edge of wisdom research, and she's responsible for the development of the widely used three-dimensional wisdom scale, amongst other achievements. Monika, welcome. Thank you for being with us. What's the weather like in Florida? Is it a sunny
It
day?
is hot and humid.
Hot and humid. That sounds like Florida.
It's very, very hot.
All
Yes.
right. Well, in London, it's kind of nothing, which is London weather. It's not warm, it's not cold, it's not particularly sunny, it's not particularly rainy. It's just sort of nothingy weather, which well, you get used to it, to be honest, once you've been in Britain a while. Anyway, but back to the task at hand. So, Monika, your keynote is entitled "How is Wisdom Related to Moral Virtues, Spirituality, Religiosity, and Flourishing?" So, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you so much for inviting me to these exciting summer symposia. And so I want to give you a very brief overview of my presentation. So I first want to show you Aristotle's argument for the interconnection between wisdom and moral virtue. Give you a brief definition of practical wisdom and moral virtue. Then I show you how elements of moral virtues are already part of contemporary definitions and operationalizations of wisdom. I give you some empirical evidence regarding the correlations between measures of wisdom and moral virtues, and then look at the relations between wisdom, moral virtues, and flourishing. And finally, I look at the relations between wisdom, spirituality, and flourishing. So let's start with, is it wise to be good, and is it good to be wise? So according to Aristotle, it is not possible to be good in the strict sense without practical wisdom. That means we do need practical wisdom in order to know what we need to do to be good, but also no practical wise without moral virtue. So moral virtue is really indeed a part of practical wisdom. So now, what are moral virtues and practical wisdom? I like this definition of moral virtue. It's based on Fowers et al. And also Sternberg and Glück, who define moral virtue as relatively stable acquired characteristics. Acquired characteristics, you're not born with it, but it develops over time. So you can develop these characteristics, you can grow them. And they're also relatively stable because you wouldn't call somebody honest who is, honest in the morning, but then at night, they are very dishonest. So it has to be relatively stable to call somebody courageous or honest or fair. And it manifests in morally motivated moral behavior. So you need to see this behavior, this moral behavior, and it has to be morally motivated rather than just by chance. And this behavior shows itself in generosity, kindness, fairness, honesty, courage, loyalty, and justice. And it will benefit others and also the common good. Now, notice the importance of motivation, intention, agency, and agency, so then it needs to be the freedom to act, and habit. So it has to become a habit rather than, only once in a while. Yet when and how virtues are expressed and enacted always depend on the particular situation. And this is what Aristotle was expressing, that you cannot really say that that you always have to act in a certain way, but it always depends on a very particular situation, because what is courageous in one situation might be foolish in another situation. So therefore, it's very hard to predict what the behavior should be in a certain situation unless you know exactly what the situation is. So what is practical wisdom then in the ancient philosophical sense? Well, according to Plato, different kinds of wisdom exist. And so we have first episteme, it's knowledge about the nature of things and the underlying principle governing their relationships. And this is what we might call now science, actually. Then there is Sophia. This is received wisdom through contemplation in pursuit of timeless and universal truths and the ultimate meaning of life. Sometimes it's also called wisdom of the gods, that you get through contemplation. So insight, suddenly insights through contemplation. And then there is phronesis. This is then practical wisdom, actually using this wisdom of Sophia and episteme, and manifesting it in prudent action, unaffected by the desires of the passion and the deception of the senses. So the deep knowledge, self-insight, understanding of life gained through episteme and Sophia need to be applied in daily life through phronesis to lead a good life. So then, to answer why might moral virtues, wisdom, and flourishing be related, we can say, well, wisdom is inherently intertwined with moral virtue because as a master virtue, wisdom orchestrates the activation which virtue is needed in this particular situation, but also the dosage. How much courage, for example, is needed in this situation, of all the virtues to make the right moral decisions in a given context to live a good life that benefits oneself and others. So, but elements of moral virtues are also present in contemporary definitions and operationalizations of wisdom. And I just wanna give you a very brief overview how wisdom is defined outside of philosophy, and I thank Charles Cassidy here for providing this nice summary here. Jester and others did the literature review of major scientific definitions of wisdom, and they came to the conclusion that these are the 6 commonly shared components of wisdom. So we have social decision-making, pragmatic knowledge of life, pro-social attitudes and behavior, reflection, self-understanding, uncertainty management, emotional homeostasis, and value relativism and tolerance. And what is an overlap with moral virtues would be, of course, pro-social attitudes and behavior, value relativism, in particular in terms of tolerance, but also emotional homeostasis, like equanimity, that is related to temperance, composure. So here's another possible answer how moral virtues and why moral virtues and wisdom might be related, because contemporary definitions and operationalization of wisdom and moral virtue overlap. So let's look at some past empirical findings, how moral virtues and wisdom are empirically related. And in order to do that, I need to introduce how wisdom has been operationalized. One of the most famous one is the Berlin wisdom paradigm that was developed by Baltus, Staudinger, and colleagues, Smith. And they define wisdom as expert knowledge system consisting of factual knowledge, strategic knowledge, knowledge about the context of life and how these change over time, knowledge about the fundamental uncertainties of life and ways to manage, and also knowledge which considers the relativism of values and life goals. And this part kind of overlaps with moral virtues because it's related to tolerance. And then we have the hero model of wisdom. This is Jeff Webster's self-assessed wisdom scale, consisting of these 5 components. And humor would be related to moral virtues because using the use of humor to make others feel comfortable. Again, we have emotional regulation here related to composure, temperance, also self-control. And then we have openness, openness toward others people's ways of living or point of view, and that's related to tolerance. So if we look at these 2 measures and their correlation, so bivariate correlation with indicators of moral virtues, so you see here the size of the bivariate correlation on this axis. You will see that the Berlin wisdom paradigm is positively related to moral reasoning, and both measures are positively relating to contributing to others' well-being, social activism, and ecological protection. And these are all statistically significant. Also, you see that the self-assessed wisdom scale correlations are a little bit higher, which might be related because, you know, they are all survey items. And then this is a 3-dimensional wisdom model that I'm using. It's based on research by Clayton and Biren, consisting of the cognitive, reflective, and compassionate dimension. So the cognitive dimension is the ability to perceive reality as it is, which requires an understanding of life and a desire to know the deeper truths. Also requires knowledge and acceptance of positive and negative aspects of human nature, the inherent limits of knowledge, and life's unpredictability, uncertainties. And to get to this kind of deeper knowledge requires a reflective dimension of wisdom, basically defined as perception of phenomena and events from multiple perspectives, and the overcoming of subjectivity and projection, which requires self-examination, self-awareness, and self-insight. And people who are really good at looking at phenomena and events from different perspectives, they understand themselves better, they understand their negative aspects as well, which reduces self-centeredness and makes people more tolerant and more compassionate toward other people, which is the compassionate dimension, sympathetic and compassionate love for all, and the motivation to alleviate suffering. And that part, the compassionate dimension, is what overlaps with moral virtues. And then we have wisdom as self-transcendence, which is based on Kurno's explicit wisdom theory. So this is Levinson's, Aldwin, and others' theory. It's basically 4 steps that gets us to self-transcendence. People start out with self-knowledge. Who am I? Often defined in terms of social roles. At the next step, there is a detachment and awareness of the changing nature of everything, including one's social roles, that they also change. And then there's an integration at the next step, a dissolution of separate inner self and the acceptance of one's shadow side, the negative side of oneself. And finally, self-transcendence, the dissolution of rigid boundaries between self and others. And that's the part that's related to moral virtue, because if the boundaries between self and others disappear, then of course it's my own it's in my own self-interest to behave in a way that benefits others. And then finally, there's the San Diego Wisdom Scale, the SDYs. Basically what Jester, Thomas et al. Did here was using these general accepted components of wisdom and just created a scale for each of them. And then, of course, we have these 3 parts of the scale that are related to moral virtues. So what are the bivariate correlations between wisdom and indicators of moral virtues? As you can see, all of the scales are, moderately, relatively highly, moderately related to forgiveness. And we only had the measures here for the three-dimensional wisdom scale, positively related to sincerity, modesty, fairness, gratitude, and greed avoidance. And the SDYs is also positively related to moral intelligence, compassion, honesty, and responsibility. So let's look at the relations between moral virtues, wisdom, and the good life. Is it good to be wise? So according to Aristotle, a life grounded in moral virtues that are orchestrated by phronesis results in eudaimonia. Now, eudaimonia has been translated in different ways, but here some, most likely life of fulfillment, flourishing, psychological well-being, and also enduring joy. Psychological well-being, this is Riff, has basically defined eudaimonia as the components of orientation toward psychosocial growth, mastery, purpose in life, a positive relationship to others, and something else. So the hypothesis is that wisdom, in this case assessed by the three-dimensional wisdom scale, orchestrates moral virtues and results in flourishing. And to test this hypothesis, we have been using data from 230 undergraduate students in the social sciences. They filled out questionnaires, online questionnaires at the beginning and end of the fall semester in 2016. Mean age was 21 years and the median age 20, so they were already more advanced in years. Three-fourths were women, about half were white. And what we found was that first, yes, wisdom indeed orchestrated sincerity, modesty, fairness, no greed, forgiveness, and gratitude. So wisdom orchestrated moral virtues, and wisdom at the beginning of the semester at T1 was positively related to flourishing at the end of the semester, measured by mastery, self-acceptance, purpose in life, and personal growth orientation. And among all the moral virtues, only gratitude was positively related to flourishing. But it also means here that wisdom then not only had a direct effect on flourishing, but also an indirect effect mediated by gratitude. So what does this mean? Yes, it appears that Aristotle was correct. Wisdom, at least as measured by the three-dimensional wisdom scale, seems to orchestrate moral virtues and result in human flourishing. So cultivating the development of wisdom likely leads to a better and more flourishing life. So finally, let's look at the relationship between spirituality and wisdom. And I'm not aware of a study that combines all three, spirituality, moral virtues, and wisdom. So we just look at spirituality and wisdom separately. Here are two questions. What is the difference between spirituality and wisdom? Well, it really very much depends on the definition of spirituality and wisdom. If wisdom is defined as self-transcendence, then there's probably not a lot of difference between spirituality and wisdom. But if wisdom is defined as expert knowledge, then I would say yes, probably a lot. And then how do we define spirituality? Lots of definition, very hard to define. I like the definition that spirituality is somehow related to the sacred. All right, now the other question is, are spiritual people likely to be wise, and are wise people likely to be spiritual? So in order to answer this question, we look at two data sets. The first data set consists of a sample of 612 respondents from the United States, Canada, Serbia, Ukraine, Iran, and China. And we collect the data from two age groups, one younger group from age range 19 to 33, with a mean age of 24 years, and then an older group, age range 59 to 99 years, with a mean age of 72.6. About half were female. And so if we look at the correlations between spirituality and wisdom, and we have as its two wisdom measures, the three-dimensional wisdom scale, and also the adult self-transcendence index, so wisdom as self-transcendence. Everything above this line is bivariate correlations above this line are statistical significant. Those under these lines are not statistical significant. So let's look at degree of spirituality, the relation with these wisdom measures, and degree of spirituality among young adults. Yeah, barely just significant for the self-transcendence scale, but not for the three-dimensional wisdom scale. If we look for older adults, yeah, they are both significant. Weak, like in the tens, right? 0.10, 0.17, 0.15, but still they are significant. And I should say, how was spirituality measured? Basically on a 0 to 10 scale, from 0, not spiritual at all, and 10, highly spiritual. And then we also measured religiosity in this way. How religious would you say you are on a scale from 0 to 10? And then if we look at this, we actually see it's not related to self-transcendence, but it's actually significantly negatively related to the three-dimensional wisdom scale among young adults. And the same is actually true among older adults. So there's clearly a difference between religion, religiosity, and spirituality. And I should mention that these older adults, these were the first kind of the older baby boomers, but this is where it happens, where there is a difference between religiosity and spirituality. I also interviewed people earlier, older adults earlier, within the previous generation before the baby boomers. And for them, there was no difference between religiosity and spirituality. Basically, even I said, you know, well, what's the difference? For them, this was exactly the same. It starts with the baby boomers, where spirituality and religiosity are actually different. So let's look at the difference between religious spirituality and wisdom among, these are the older adults, the ones before the baby boomers that I interviewed much earlier. The sample consists here of 116 older community residents, 23 nursing home residents, and 19 hospice patients, with a mean and median age of 74 years. 67% were women and 78% were white. So to measure religious spirituality, I used a combination of an intrinsic religious orientation, which means having dedicated your life to God or a higher power, rather than using religion for other purposes, you know, to make acquaintances or friends, or even to find solace in times of hardship. So intrinsic religiosity is really this dedication of one's life to religion, or to a higher power. And I combined this with a spiritual belief scale. Spiritual beliefs are not related to a particular religion, but really just higher power. A lot of questions about higher power. And then wisdom was assessed by the three-dimensional wisdom scale. So this is the raw data here, the association between religious spirituality and three-dimensional wisdom. And what is it, right? Is it positively, negatively related? Actually, it's not. You know, there's absolutely no association between these two variables. So then what I did, you know, if we divide this up, so they are both measured on a 1 to 5 scale. 3 is neutral, right? So 4 means that on average, people at least agreed to all of the items. You see, in terms of religious spirituality, and of course, these are older people in the South of the United States. This is a religious bunch, right? A lot of people are quite religious. But then if we look, and again, if we look at the lower end, not a lot of people are not religious. Lower end, that they're not at least, medium in terms of neutral. These were people who disagree with these religious items. And there are not that many people. And then if we do the same for wisdom, there are not as many people here on top that we would call high, relatively high on wisdom, but there are also not, a little bit more that are relatively low on wisdom. But what we also notice is here, it's kind of empty in this, corner. So these are maybe the only people that we would say they're both low on religious spirituality and low on wisdom. And these are the people that are high on both. High on wisdom and high on religious spirituality. We have some people here that are high on religious spirituality, but low on wisdom, and very few people, only 3 that I would consider high on wisdom, but low on religious spirituality. So if we look at effects of religious spirituality and wisdom on flourishing, what we see is, yes, wisdom was positively related to purpose in life, mastery, and subjective well-being. And religious spirituality was also positively related to purpose in life and subjective well-being, but not to mastery. And it was also, the effects were lower. So these here, the confidence intervals do not overlap than for wisdom. Okay, I want to give you some case studies and tell you what the difference is between religion, religious spirituality, and wisdom. So let's start with Leanne. And of course, all names are pseudonyms. Leanne was a 76-year-old white divorced nursing home resident with no high school degree who used to be a semi-skilled worker. Leanne had the 8th lowest religious spirituality score and a relatively low score on wisdom. Also, Leanne's parents were Catholic. She became a Protestant when she was young because she liked the Protestant church better than the Catholic church. However, she lost all interest in church and religion at the age of about 15 or 16 years. She said, "I was saved when I was young, but when I got older, I didn't bother." To the question of how her daily life was influenced by spiritual beliefs, Leanne answered, "Hardly anything." When asked in what kind of religious or spiritual practices she engaged, she replied, "I hardly do." Leanne did not participate in the spiritual and religious activities offered by the nursing home, did not listen to religious programs, did not pray, and did not read the Bible. Yet she still believed in God, who, she said, quote, "controls everything." However, when asked if there was any other meaning that she associated with God and what God means to her personally, she replied, "I never thought about it." Later in the interview, she added, "I have no religion as far as God is concerned. Faith in God? I don't have much." Leanne seemed to have lost all faith in God about 5 years earlier after her sisters and brother died and left her all alone. However, there was no indication that Leanne had been spiritual or religious when her siblings were still alive. When asked what she thought was the meaning of life was, Leanne said, "I figure if my children got their religion, that was the main thing. I didn't care for it." When probed what she thought was the meaning of her life, what gave her life purpose, and what helped her to keep going, Leanne replied, "I don't feel like my life has that much purpose because I've lost so much time, people that I was close to, and I'm alone now." Leanne neither had religion nor wisdom, nor the help to cope with hardship, which left her feeling alone and depressed. The next person is Jerome, a 61-year-old African-American hospice patient who had a high religious spirituality score, but the 4th lowest wisdom score. Jerome had metastatic cancer, had no high school degree, had been a farmer throughout life, was separated from his wife of 37 years and lived at home. Jerome was a lifelong Baptist, and he stated that all of his present life was influenced by his religion. He said, "I believe in the Savior. I believe I'm in God's hands. I talk to him daily, all through the day. I'm not going to take a chance. If something hits you, it hits you. You can't help it." Jerome might have tried to stay in constant contact with God to keep the door to heaven open in case of a sudden death. To the question, "What does God mean to you?" Jerome answered, "Everything. Without God, we wouldn't be nothing. He's the one who created us. God never left me. He won't leave me. He promised that. He said, 'I give this and I will take this. Blessed be the name of the Lord.' You see, I've got cancer. They gave me 3 or 4 months to live, but God hasn't killed me yet. God put me here and he isn't going to leave me. They gave me the diagnosis about a month and a half ago, but I know God has given me time." Jerome was convinced that God is and always was with him, even during the times when he did not follow the teachings of his faith. He stated that his faith had become stronger due to his illness. He said, "I'm more close in spirit than I was, some of it because I've got cancer." This kind of religious faith, however, might become problematic when the prophecy that God has given extra time fails. Also, Jerome lived about 3 months longer than what the doctors expected. It was not clear if he was satisfied with the extra time that, in his mind, God had granted him, or if he expected God to let him live a number of extra years. According to Jerome, quote, "The devil does all the bad things, sickness and all, and God can stop the devil. Yet what happens when sickness and misfortune continue? Does this mean that God is punishing the person for his or her sins?" Without wise discernment and a mature religious and spiritual faith, viewing everything through a religious lens might set a person up for major disappointments and a spiritual crisis if God does not behave as one wishes. For Jerome, the meaning of life consisted of living the right way or of choosing to do good rather than evil, but he acknowledged that it was not always easy to choose to do the right thing. He said, "You've got a choice. I know you've got a choice. I can choose to drink, which I do drink. I can choose to smoke, which I do smoke. I can choose to quit, which I go through sometimes. I can do anything I want to." Jerome did not live an ethical life of service to others or a life that was dedicated to the common good, which might explain his relatively low wisdom score. Also, he married at age 24. He was intimately involved with 2 other women simultaneously for a number of years. He also had 2 children with other women, but none with his wife. He never met his daughter and left his son when he was 7 years old. He did not know where his daughter and son currently were living, but knew that 2 years ago his son had been in jail. So let's compare Jerome with Marc. Marc was a 76-year-old white hospice patient who lived at the hospice care center and suffered from the same metastatic cancer as Jerome. He had a relatively high wisdom score, but the lowest religious spirituality score in the sample. Marc had served in World War II, had a graduate degree, and had been an experimental psychologist in his professional life. He married at age 22, was widowed at age 54 after 32 years of marriage, and remarried 3 years later. He had been married to a second wife who was about 16 years his junior for 18 years. Marc was raised as a Catholic. He went to Catholic elementary school, had religious parents and siblings, and even had a sister who was a nun. Yet he considered himself, quote, "a recovering Catholic." According to Marc, religion, quote, "was like a foreign language to me. My first recollection is that it was like utter madness to me." He explained, "I mean, I never really went into religion. As far back as I can remember, probably in the 1st grade, I didn't know what they were talking about. Nothing has changed. I thought and still think it's a lot of crap. I don't buy any of it. I went along just to be sociable with the conventions of getting married in church and burying relatives through the church and all that sort of thing. But religion doesn't make any sense to me. It's like I sat down and wrote a story totally out of my imagination that somebody was performing miracles, totally outlandish, silly stuff that has no facts behind it. So the interviewer asks, it's not logical. Yeah, you have to give yourself over like you turn your brains in. Marc's scientific rational mind just could not make sense of the logic-defying narrative of religious faith. Yet he did not become an atheistic crusader, but granted others their religious beliefs and convictions. He said, religion didn't make sense, but most of the world thinks it makes sense. So instead of arguing all my life, I just go along with. If you want to go to church or want to do this, like my first wife was pretty religious too, so my kids went to private Catholic schools. Interestingly, Marc's second wife was also very religious and active in the Episcopalian church. She even studied her faith through an intensive 4-year program. Marc tolerated his wife's faith without in any way supporting it, except for the occasional obligatory church visit with his wife. Not surprisingly, Marc did not believe in God. To the question, what do you believe? He answered, I don't know. Science? Logic? I don't believe in religion. I think it may be doing more harm than good. A lot of these people around the world killing each other because they are the wrong religion. I think we might be better off without any religion, but I think you have to have something. A lot of people need something. I wish I had it. I'm jealous of these people who go around smiling and happy like the world is wonderful and Christ is looking down on me. I wish I could do that, but I just can't. I see happy people here dying. I think there's a lot more of us. Most of us are undercover, really. When the interviewer asked Marc if there was anything else he believed in or that was his guiding principle, he answered, I believe in love, caring about others, which I've often done, not as much as I should have. When I was in the war part of my time, I was a rifleman, which is the lowest you can be in the service. I found myself more helping wounded guys than trying to kill anybody. I've done what I could to help, but I was oriented toward killing people. I tried to keep them from bleeding to death, which wasn't always very successful. To the question, what do you think is the meaning of life? Marc replied, I guess I've thought about it now and then, but I never came to any conclusion that there is any meaning. It's like people evolve or animals evolve. I wouldn't say they are a tribute to some Superman. I don't know. It's just the way life is. So the interviewer asked, what do you think is the meaning of your life? I don't know, not much. I think if I had never been born, the world would have continued on. Although Marc believed in love and caring about others, his humanistic but non-spiritual perspective made it difficult for him to see a deeper meaning in life in general and also in his personal life more specifically. This, however, made him an exception among relatively wise elders who tended to score high on life meaning. So let's look at the final case of James, a married, relatively healthy, 79-year-old African-American retired school administrator with a graduate degree who lived in the community. James had served in World War II right after high school. He had the 5th highest wisdom score and a relatively high religious spirituality score. James was a lifelong Baptist, like Jerome, a deacon and the president of his Baptist church, and the treasurer of the Gideons, who distribute free Bibles. To the question of how his daily life was influenced by his religion or spirituality, James replied, I feel that religion and your belief in God controls and guides every possible activity of your life. Dealing with people, dealing with employment, dealing with honesty and all of that. You become dedicated and something just guides you into the realm of the Lord God. You don't have to stop to think about it. Well, I'm a Christian, I'm going to do this in a Christian way, or I'm going to deal with this in a Christian-like manner. Being a Christian automatically guides you, and I feel that's forever with you once you get into that realm. James exemplified an intrinsic religious orientation by living his religion and dedicating his life to religion and God. as he said, quote, 24 hours a day. He credited his World War II experience with getting closer to God. He explained, "You had time to sit down and talk and see things and relate to how God will take care of you. You don't worry about this, like what's going to happen. God is in charge." That kind of thing brought me much closer to the spiritual. I figured I'd seen so many things happen to soldiers and whatnot that didn't happen to me, that I figured that something was protecting me, that I had no control, no physical control over. That just made my life change. His World War II experience did not only change James' spiritual life, but also his mundane life. He had originally planned to get a job right after high school, but when he returned from Europe after the war, he decided to continue his dedication, inspired by the educated men who served with him in the war. To the question, "What does God mean to you?" James answered, "He is a supreme being and he's always been. We don't have no picture. He can take on any image. God can come to you in the form of another person, in the form of your child, and make statements of things that will affect you and bring you to the Christian conscience. This God is both mysterious and very personal at the same time, as he can appear in any form to bring the person back on the righteous and morally virtuous path. Following on this path by contributing to the common good was very important for James. He considered contributing to the common good his meaning in life. He said, "I think that every living person should make some contribution, something in return for their being a short span on this earth." William Cullen Bryant said, "Life is no longer than the clap of a hand, one life. So we have a short life as compared to life on this earth, and we should try to do something that benefits mankind and others who may tread the same trail that we are treading. Make it better for them, not to get all that I can out of life, but to make it better for those who follow, like the old man building the bridge. He was just building a bridge across the stream. They asked him, 'Old man, at your age, what are you working about building a bridge?' He said, 'I built this bridge not for myself, but I'm building it for those who may follow me.' That's what I think life is all about, bridge building. All of us are supposed to be building bridges, making it better for those who will follow." Indeed, contributing to the common good was what James did as a school administrator and what he continued to do as an influential member of his church and a respected member in the community. He said, "You become respected and known for your neighbors as an upright person, and they'll bring you certain problems. For example, if members of the community are overtaken by drugs or alcohol or fall in the streets, who would they call? They don't call the police. They get him up out of the street, take him home, put him in the bed, tell him to sober up and go to church tomorrow, the brother that's fallen. You get that reputation in the community and you get a lot of calls and you can help a lot of people. But who you help, you don't go out calling names and that kind of thing. That's between you and your God and that person. You might tell him, 'Listen, brother or sister, this is between you and me what happened. You want to straighten up.' By that way, you call the people's conscience, and it can make a difference in their life. Water dropping on a rock will knock a hole in it. You see? So you keep tapping on it. You don't break it all at once." James' helpful attitude and behavior exemplified a wise elder who gives wise and gentle advice without shaming the person who has fallen. James knew that in the end, it is up to each person to find the right way to live, but at the same time, he did not give up on anyone, but kept dropping water on the rock. So what does it all mean? Well, wise people are more likely to identify as spiritual than religious. Yet not all wise people are spiritual, and some wise individuals hold humanistic values rather than religious values. And not all spiritual and religious people are wise, as we have seen. So I just made it in my 45 minutes, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Monika, while we're, do please add your questions in the chat or put your hand up. tell us a little bit more about the sociocultural circumstances of some of those case studies. So which part of the USA were they in? How recently was it? Because this stuff is obviously so situated in terms of the individuals concerned.
That's right. So the last study with the case studies that I presented, they were interviewed around 2000, and they were older adults. As I say, this is a generation before the baby boomers.
Around 2000. Okay,
So
and where were they?
The greatest generation, I think they are called, because they served in World War II. The men served in World War II, so they are called the greatest generation. The one that I showed before, the ones with the simple correlations, these were the baby boomers. They were interviewed later. And from the US part, they were all interviewed around where I live, right? So that I could reach them, which is Florida. We are in north central Florida. We are not in Miami. This is not down in the south. But it's still the South, and people, particularly older adults, tend to be very religious. Yes.
So, given that it being 25-ish or 24-ish years ago, that was 20-ish years ago, and in that circumstances, what do you think in terms of understanding the relationship between wisdom, religiosity, and spirituality? What do you think is a key take home from those case studies?
Well, I think that this relationship that in what I'm looking at, I'm actually collecting data right now with current undergraduate students and looking at this. So some people think that spirituality, like Dilip Jeste and his colleagues, they have included spirituality in a wisdom scale. And they think that spirituality is a component of wisdom. I think spirituality is not a component of wisdom. It might be related, but I do not want to exclude the humanists,
Absolutely, the wise atheists, yeah.
Exactly, what this case study, they're clearly not religious, not spiritual at all, but very humanistic. And I do not want to exclude the humanists from wisdom, quite frankly. And so you see with the three-dimensional wisdom scale that the relationship was actually negative in terms of religiosity, which I thought was kind of interesting in the way it was measured, but it was positive for at least for the older adults for spirituality. So there is a difference that wise people might not endorse organized religion, but they are still spiritual. They are still interested in something beyond the material world, I would say. So
yeah, got it. Thank you. Well, that certainly makes sense. With regards to the correlational data, was that also from Florida? With regards to like the negative correlations between religiosity and wisdom?
The correlational data came from other studies, not that I conducted. The ones that from Webster and the Berlin Wisdom Paradigm, these are not what I conducted, so they came from other places.
Got it.
Then we had, of course, when I showed the ones with the different countries, the one that were not in the United States came from different countries, right? So yes, so they are from other places. The one that I collected comes from where I live, exactly, but not other studies.
Bella asked if with the case study work, did you also do thematic analysis to pull out general themes, or did you just focus on the individual cases?
I only looked at extreme cases in this case. I did not code them all. Because we did have quantitative data, so there's a quantitative data for that, but I did not. I really only looked at extreme cases.
And Nick asks, is there a Dunning-Kruger effect on people's self-reported wisdom?
Meaning basically that they are in terms of
so yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect, if I was to read it out here, is a bias in which people with limited competence overestimate their abilities in certain domains.
Yeah, I mean, could be, right? I mean, that's always a question, you know. I mean, in terms, people do not lie. People do not. I mean, when I interview people, it's I would say they don't lie, but they might, you know, it's self-deception in some ways, you know, that could happen. This people believe, you know, that they might have certain characteristics, even so they do not. A lot of the wisdom items are actually negatively worded, so you have to say no to get a high score. And that was done, I mean, not on purpose, but this is how it came out, because to combat social desirability, because it's a little bit harder to say no, rather than just to agree to all of the items. But, you know, social desirability, as I say, I don't think it's on purpose, but self-deception, yeah, I mean, probably plays a role.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that this must come up quite a lot, the issue of self-reporting wisdom,
Yeah, but
and the
it's
extent
not,
to
it's,
which.
you know, I mean, this is like with all scales. People are not asked how wise are you on the scale from 0 to 10, right? That would be a problem. These are, I mean, these are items that people don't necessarily associate with wisdom, right? So we are just combining these and call it wisdom because we think these are characteristics of wisdom. But because with this, you can all scales, you know, have these problems in some
Well,
ways.
well, that is true. It does point to the sort of deeper issues with psychometrics,
Yeah,
and which are fascinating in of themselves. But
yeah,
do we let's see if we have any other. I don't think we have any other questions at the moment in the chat. Oh, Judith says there's an interesting wisdom paradox. If a self-critical attitude is a part of wisdom, and those people who describe themselves wise might be questionable, as Monica says, not lying. Yeah, exactly. It's more about sort of self-awareness.
yeah,
What I think is very interesting is that when someone's responding to a rating scale and endorsing levels of agreement or whatever the other key points are, it's in reference to an internalized scale about what is high and what's low.
yeah,
And if someone discovers through their personal development that there's lots of things that they don't know, that changes their internal reference point because they start to realize that they're not as high as they thought they were in terms of how much they know or how much, you know, they were able to consider other people's opinion because they're suddenly aware of everything they don't know. And so they sort of push back against those sort of ideas that I might be all wise because I suddenly am aware of my unknowing. And I certainly think that's very interesting. But it also relates back to me to what Judith and I were talking about earlier on, which is the point that often wisdom relates to the midpoint on a scale where people realize that there are unhealthy extremes in all kinds of apparent virtues or attributes. So actually, you know, I've often wondered whether a sort of curvilinear take on wisdom self-report would be an interesting one. As I have with, you know, with lots of other scales as well. I'm equally skeptical as to whether very high scores on a happiness or a well-being scale is a good thing.
Well,
So
yes, I mean,
back to you.
it is tricky, you know, it is tricky, the whole thing. But in terms of, I mean, what Nick was saying, is it wise to assume people don't lie? The truth is, you know, I did these interviews with older adults, and you can see that they are really grapple with the answer, you know, in some ways. And they they don't bother to lie, quite frankly. You know,
I
yes, they
don't I
might
don't
be
I don't consider it a lie. Definitely not. It's
right. I
simply
mean,
people's best self-perception at the
exactly,
time, but that's
exactly.
always limited,
Yes,
even
yes,
if it's not
that is
mendacious.
true. That's true. There might be this over self-confidence or this, you know, self-deception, but it's not that they are lying to you, or, you know, or to, you know, and even if it's a
Indeed, no,
good lie, you know, why
lying
should they, you
insinuates a
know?
deception. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah. So I mean, but no, that I mean, it's remains a fascinating conundrum in terms of, you know, the where on any scale the optimum
Yeah,
is, and there are lots of
but
interesting takes on it. But yeah, fascinating. Let's
this is also why it's interesting then to combine quantitative and qualitative data.
definitely.
you know, because then you can look at it in a little bit more closely.
I think so too. And actually, something that I'm a big fan of, but don't personally do enough, have done, and I'd like to do more, is get get third-party reports as well. Because there was a fascinating study which I report in my book Development Through Adulthood, where they found that third-party reports of anger predicted heart disease, but self-reported reports of anger did not. So in other words, that someone who was close to you was more likely to be able to give a decent, a kind of sense of how angry you were as a person, and that would then, predict your cardiac health, whereas self-reports not so much. So yeah, I think that's it's something that I think psychologists avoid because it's just rather a lot of work getting data from other people. Self-reports so much easier. But I do think that it's a really important part of the data equation in psychology. And I know that there's a whole literature on sort of wisdom nominees, people who you nominate as wise, which is fascinating too, which has a sort of qualitative and quantitative mix. Judith has asked if I can post the link to the study. I will do, Judith. I'll hunt it down and pop it in the chat, hopefully in the break. Talking about a break, I think let's have one now, if that's okay with everybody.
When should we come back?
So this is a similar situation to the morning. So I'm going to say if we can reconvene in 10 minutes, if that's okay. So we'll restart at 3:07. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, fine. Sounds good.
Lovely. See you all then. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Monika, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Monika for the follow-on workshop, How to Grow in Wisdom. Very much looking forward to this. Over to you.
All right, thank you. And so this is a little bit more with audio audience participation. So we will see how this goes. So Pascal Leone suggests two pathways for growing in wisdom. And so the first one are limit situations or ultimate limit situations. And the second one is meditation. So let's start with ultimate limit situations. So he says, in a limit situation, the person experiences with awareness and resolve an enduring failure to cope with unwanted and overwhelming circumstances that cannot be avoided or apparently resolved. Life hardships that are endured with existential awareness lead to remarkable growth in the self. And then he says, but ultimate limit situations that cannot be undone and are nonetheless faced with consciousness and resolve, situations like death, illness, aging, irremediable oppression or loss, extreme poverty, rightful resistance or rebellion, guilt, absolute failure, danger, uncontrollable fear, etc., lead to the natural emergence of a transcendental self if they do not destroy the person first. This is my highlight. So if you want to use the chat window, or you can also raise your hand or talk, what do you think about this? Do you believe that limit situations or ultimate limit situation help us grow in wisdom? Okay, yes, not necessarily. Eeva, I would say it depends, right? So what does it depend on?
I'm curious as to what Pascal Leone would define as transcendental self in that paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's similar to the self-transcendence scale. It's like this, where the boundary between oneself and others kind of disappears, and one has this feeling, of oneness with everything. So I think whereas by sometimes, yeah, I think it depends on how you hold such contents. It depends, right? I see a lot of depends. Exactly. I think it's it could, but it also could not, right? And I think this is what I'm going to show you. I really kind of like this picture. This comes from Aldwin and Levinson, Kelly, lifespan developmental perspectives on stress-related growth. So what they are suggesting that loss could lead to stress-related growth, right? And this is exactly this idea of the idea comes from this a crisis, and particularly a crisis that is a shock to the system, might throw people out of their usual routine. So they have to look at life from different perspectives, which was part of the three-dimensional wisdom model. And they might rearrange their priorities. They might come to find a deeper meaning of life. They might appreciate other people more. And this is, leading to the stress-related growth, or sometimes called post-traumatic growth, also have deeper spirituality and all these kinds. If this happens, and then this leads to wisdom and in this model, a better adaptation to chronic illness later in life, because later in life, once people age, there's a good chance that illness will happen. And so it's kind of a preparation for the struggle that can happen in old age. However, a lot of people said it depends, right? Exactly. And what it depends on is, I think, exactly this. What they put here as moderating factors, positive support, intelligence, a feeling of mastery. Here, what Judith is saying, right? It's like these resources for wisdom. And do they have positive coping capacities? Because if not, if this is not present, it can go the other way. This is the vulnerability trajectory. If there is poor social support, the neuroticism, people do not, their personality characteristic, that they are neurotic, they have low resource levels, they tend to engage in negative coping, then it can actually increase more exposure to stress, and that can lead, or they are engaging in drinking to cope with it, with stresses and loss. And this can lead to early onset of chronic illness in middle age, and then even a poor adaptation to chronic illness in later life. And it's getting more complicated. There are also other turning points that can relate to stress-related growth or not. So it's not as simple. It's not that should you be glad that you have these limit situation, ultimate limit situations. No, because it's also stressful. It's very stressful, but it's hard to avoid it. So it's a good idea, to learn to cope with it in a positive way. But it is not a necessarily automatic way to increase in wisdom, because it can go in the other opposite direction and actually to lead to depression and despair. So given that, why don't we go the meditation route? We have another route. And I want to give an introduction to a meditation. It's a little bit of a guided breath meditation, 10 minutes. If you don't want to participate in the meditation, you have 10 minutes of a break right now. So I'm going to get this going. And so it's 10 minutes, and then we will talk about it.
Now let us practice Anapana for about 10 minutes. Practice Anapana. Sit comfortably, comfortably in any posture that suits you. Keep your back and your neck straight. Keep your eyes gently closed. Those who wear spectacles should take off their spectacles during meditation period. Keep your mouth gently closed and focus your entire attention on the area at the entrance of the nostrils. The area at the entrance of the nostrils. And remain aware of every breath coming in, every breath going out. Natural breath, normal breath, as it is, as it is. If it is long, it is long. If it is short, it is short. Passing to left nostril. Passing to right nostril. Or through both the nostrils. Just remain aware, do nothing. Just remain aware. Alert, attentive, vigilant, remain alert, attentive, vigilant. Constantly aware of the breath, the incoming breath, the outgoing breath, incoming breath, outgoing breath. Keep your attention steadfastly fixed on this area, the entrance of the nostrils. Like a gatekeeper, like a watchman, aware of every breath entering the nostril, aware of every breath moving out of the nostrils. Alert, attentive, vigilant. Incoming breath, outgoing breath, natural breath, pure breath, nothing but breath. Mangalam Bhavatu Sada Mangalam Bhavatu Sada Mangalam. Good, good. Be happy, be happy, be happy.
All right. How was the meditation experience? Again, if you can use the chat or you just talk. How was it? Yeah. Sorry about the voice. This is what I what I have is as a recording. Nice break, refreshing, relaxing. Good, good. Familiar? Okay, okay. Familiar. Good. Right. So, how might meditation help us grow in wisdom? What do you think?
Well, I can speak concretely because I do meditate and it has helped me, I think. And I think that how I would kind of describe it is that if you imagine that kind of the world is full of things where you're being asked to do something quickly and compulsively and reactively, like check Instagram or something like that,
Mhm.
and you do it compulsively, reactively, and unreflectively. It feels like meditation is sort of the opposite to that. It's like you feel things, but then you don't act on them. Or something comes up and you observe it rather than rush after it or sort of try and grab it or hate it or whatever. So it feels like it just gives some space to be in between all the kind of hecticness to develop that self-reflectiveness. I mean, I do think that I don't think meditation is all sweetness and light. I think can be quite a difficult practice.
Oh yeah.
But that's part and parcel of it.
But yeah, that's a very nice description, Oliver, that you gave. Exactly. It gives a little bit of a distance, and we have a little bit, gives us an opportunity to, what Bela was saying, it slows us down, right? So in terms of self-reflection, right?
Yeah, Bella has her hand up. Bella, do you want to say something?
Mhm.
I'm just going to perhaps reiterate what you said in different words, that we live in a hyperactive world.
Mhm.
You're just bombarded with. So both our amygdala and prefrontal cortex are always in hyperactive mode.
Mhm.
So it just sort of calms down both amygdala, that is the emotional brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the analytical brain, to bring it to a very beautiful harmony or a synchronized way, where you are able to tap into the wise part of your brain when both of these are contained, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, exactly. It gives us a little bit, it takes us out of the hectic. It allows us to self-reflect, right? Promotes mindfulness, right? And yes, Eva, I do count movement meditation in this, that's fine. Definitely, everything that can slow us down a little bit, help us to reflect, or just to gives us the space, also what Oliver was saying, it gives us the space so that we are not automatically reacting, but you actually have a chance to observe, right? And then, so, and have the freedom not to react. Eva.
Yes, came to my mind that meditation can also have some harmful consequences. It doesn't suit to everybody, because I know some cases in meditation camps. For example, some have went to psychosis, gone mad. And in my case, introspective meditation doesn't make anything special to me. But for some strange reason, Tai Chi and Qigong, which are movement meditation, they act as opposite way. So I think it's quite individual which kind of suits to you.
No, it's true. You have to see if it suits you or not. Absolutely. And I also like these more, that's why, just observing rather than manipulating your body, right? So observing your breath, observing your body rather than trying to achieve anything, really give you the space in some ways, just the freedom not to react, really. I think that's what meditation can do for you. So, Eeva, did you want to say anything more, because you still have your hand up?
Yeah. I think in Tai Chi and Qigong, I must focus on my attention to my movement.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more easier than the look inwards and try to be peaceful in that way. Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean, moving meditation is perfectly all right. Absolutely, yeah. Whatever fits, exactly. Whatever fits. But again, also with the movement meditation, it's the same kind of principle. That it takes you out of the hectic of everyday life, and then calms you down in a slightly different way. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
One psychotherapist told me that it's kind of a distraction technique which is used in psychotherapies. So you distract the outer reality off from you, and you are just focused on something else.
That kind of feels like the opposite to me. It feels like a lot of things are a distraction, and this is a sort of the opposite of that. That's what it feels like to me. I mean, so certainly, the contemporary world is designed around distraction and things that grab our attention temporarily. So it's about kind of stabilizing and creating when it's done well, it creates a calm interior.
Yeah. I actually agree with Oliver. For me, it's more helping me to come to the present moment, right? To actually be here, which I rarely am, because I'm mostly in my head and thinking about other things. And so, and this is the same with movement meditation, right? It actually helps me to be grounded in the here and now, or to try to get to this, rather than thinking about other things and thousands of other things. So
I think that the person in question, he is very experienced clinical psychologist, and he used the term in some certain specific sense. I think so.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
Well, it might also depend on the kind of meditation. He might have a certain meditation in mind, right? What he was talking about. So okay, well, I want to go, talk about how meditation might be related to the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. So, and this is kind of translated in a more modern way, the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. Suffering happens all the time. So the first noble truth is suffering happens all the time because people always want more or something better than what we have. There's always this some people say suffering is maybe too hard of a word, but this kind of dissatisfaction, you're not completely fine with what is, kind of dissatisfaction. Because we don't have what we want, we suffer and feel upset, and we feel dissatisfied. So if we accept what we have and stop wanting more, we will become happy. And following the Noble Eightfold Path will help achieve this. So what's the Noble Eightfold Path? Here it is, right? So, and I just want to say, this is what we were talking about earlier, right? The ethical conduct, ethics, moral values. And in the Noble Eightfold Path, we have right speech, which means don't lie, don't use words intended to hurt or harm others. There is right action, don't kill, don't steal, don't engage in sexual misconduct, don't use intoxicant, and right livelihood, don't engage in any job that violates or encourages others to violate right speech or right action. And then this morality combining with division of mental discipline, which is right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration through meditation. A lot of this can be, through meditation. That leads us then to wisdom, right understanding, which is the ability to perceive reality as it is, including a deep understanding of the importance of moral virtues for one's own well-being, So that, following moral virtues is not just good for other people, even so it definitely benefits other people, but the wise understand that actually following moral virtues is actually good for oneself because one feels better. And that can be realized through meditation, because through meditation, if one violates ethical conduct, this will come up in meditation as some kind of negative discontent. And by realizing this, one realizes that yes, following moral, ethical conduct actually helps one's own well-being. And then the next is right thought, pure mind that is free of ill will and maliciousness and full of compassion toward all beings. So through these eightfold paths that, according to Buddhist philosophy, leads to wisdom. All right, I want to leave you, I think I have about 10 minutes or so, because we started later. I want to leave you with another way of increasing in wisdom or growing in wisdom. And this is based on a book by Jules Evans, Philosophy for Life and Other Dangerous Situations, Epictetus and the Art of Maintaining Control. I really like this philosophy. It's based on the Stoics, right? It's a Stoic philosophy. Epictetus was born lived between 55 and 135 in the Common Area. He was born a slave, which means that his mother was a slave. He was beaten, tortured, had his leg broken so badly by his first owner that he remained lame. That's why we have his crutch here in this picture. I think he just wasn't a good slave because he was probably very smart, but maybe not, conducive to a hard labor. This is why the first owner gave up and sold him. And his second owner, Epaphroditus, allowed Epictetus to study under the Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus and eventually gave him his freedom. And then after becoming a free man, Epictetus became a Stoic philosopher himself and basically taught philosophy, Stoic philosophy. And that's what he's saying. It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. So he says, some things are up to us and others are not. And there's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. So what is, again, if you can use the chat window, what is not in our control? Can you write down of the things that are not in our control? What other people do? Yes. Think. True. Unfortunately. Right. What else? Nature. Yes. World's economy. Absolutely. Other people's behavior. Yep. As much as we like to have an influence on that, we don't. Exactly. What else? I'm waiting for if I think that people in different parts of the world have different beliefs of what can and can't be controlled. Maybe, but is it true? Is it true? All right, well, let me give you my list here. Our genetic makeup, our body, right? I mean, yes, we have maybe some influence, but, not over our genetic makeup, how tall we are, not up to us. Our parents, no control of who our parents are. Our friends, our reputation, our co-workers, our boss, the weather, the economy, the past, the future, the fact that we are going to die, etc. So a lot of things. We have no control over that. So Epictetus says, what do we have control over? And he doesn't say that we have this control over automatically, but if there's any chance that we have control over anything, what do you think we do have control over?
Well, our thoughts is an interesting one. Because if you try and stop thinking certain things, it tends to make those thoughts come harder. So it's what I find interesting with meditation is that you don't try and stop the thought, you just come back to the breath. And so it's, I don't know what you've got in that column, but thinking thoughts is an interesting one. It's easier to control behavior than it is thought, I think.
So we have our reactions to others. Okay, we'll get to this. And what Epictetus says, our beliefs, and he does say our thoughts, and I would say our behavior, but not always, because sometimes people make you do things. Now, yes, you're right. Our thoughts is an interesting one because you see in meditation that you don't have control over your thoughts. It's just happening, blah, 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 right? And our beliefs might be influenced by our parents, by our upbringing and the culture. But what he's saying, if we have any chance whatsoever to have any control over this, then this is what this is: beliefs and thoughts. Now, somewhere I saw in the chat that, well, we could debate the thing that it's not in our control. Do you want to debate any of this? You think that we do have actually control over any of this that is in the not in our control column here?
Yeah, I think most of them are debatable.
Give me an example.
Jonathan's up for debating them. Jonathan, do you want to have a go?
Jonathan, you want to debate one of those?
Oh, I can debate some of them, sure, but it really depends upon the fundamental underlying perception of reality that you look at them from. So control, what do you mean by control? And who is the self that is said to be controlling?
Well, let's just make it simple and give me one of these and just tell me that you think that you actually have control over. What
well, I would say, so let's say influence over who our friends are.
Good point, right? Good point. Yes, we can choose our friends.
And we influence the choice because we may act in ways that attract certain people to us and keep other people away.
That's true. That's true. We can choose our friends. We might attract certain friends. We can dump friends if we don't like them anymore. But what this means, we do not have control over our friends' behavior in the end.
Yeah.
Right?
We don't have control over their behavior, but we can choose whether they're our friends or not, depending upon their behavior.
That's true, but this is about our friends' behavior. In the end, we have no control over our friends. We can choose who are our friends.
Okay.
That's the behavior
but this is what
part.
I mean by what do you mean by control?
Right. That's where what's in the behavior part, right? But we do not really have control over our friends, what they are doing, right?
Well, so maybe I misread it and implied who our friends are.
Yeah, right. And that's often a misunderstanding, right? It's the same thing, right, with our coworkers or our boss. I can leave my work, right? But I do not have control over my boss or my coworkers once I have a job.
But then what about the future?
How about the future?
Because we like to debate.
How about the future?
No, so it to me would depend upon how we look at the way, let's say if you were looking at the Buddhist thing, how do we shape our karma? How do our present attitudes and actions and thought create the effect that the universe brings back to us?
Yes. And you already said it, actually. You already said the answer, because it is our present. Our present influences the future. So we don't have control over the future, but we have control over the present, right? in the present, we can decide what we want to do, which then might influence our future, but we do not have control over the future. We only have control over the present. What we
Very,
do.
very good points, counterpoints.
Okay. Bella, I see your hand up.
Just thinking out aloud that between both these extremes, and this is after Jonathan his debate, between both these extremes, not in our control and in our control, there can be some gray areas where like slightly in our control or somewhat in our control, if that makes sense. So future perhaps can fall in that category. So we do not have 100% control over future, but what we do in the present, that determines how our future will be. So that would that gray area, if that makes sense.
Yes, I know what you're saying, but in the end, we do not have control over the future because other things might happen in the future. Because the future is not clear.
You're right.
We have control over the present, absolutely, but not over the future because the future is not there, right? Only when the future becomes present have we control over it.
Just Monica, Claire's got her hand up. I'm aware of the time slightly, and I feel that
Claire,
we've got five slides to go.
And then we are finishing up here.
Claire?
That's very kind. I was going to put my hand down, but I think this comes back to this idea that we like to think that we have control, right? And so when I look at this list, I can see, and I really appreciate this discussion because it realizes how little control we do have over things, but we like to believe that we have control. And so, you know, I think about when I saw the weather, I was like, well, China was trying to control their weather, right? By trying to shoot at clouds. And so I think we do spend a lot of time in our lives trying to control these things. And I do think, as I said earlier, that there is a cultural component to this, where depending on where you are in the world, there's maybe more of a belief, like coming back to maybe differences between the US and other places, and I know you're in the US as well, that there is this like belief that we can use technology to control some of these things that maybe are uncontrollable.
Yes, and that's true. But again, the current weather I don't have control over, right? I do not like that it is so hot. Now, could we do something, you know, against global warming? Absolutely. That's the behavior part, right? But right now, I do not have control over this hot weather or, you know, if it rains or whatever, you know, even so I might not like it. So that's the idea behind this, right? What do I actually have control over? Yes, behavior, yeah, but not this. Anyway, so what Epictetus says, we have two fatal mistakes that cause suffering. We try to control things that are not under our control. And if we cannot control these things, we feel helpless, become miserable, depressed, anxious, angry, and so on, right? And then, right, this is a second mistake. We do not take responsibility for what we can control. That is our thoughts and beliefs and behavior, but then blame them on external events, circumstances, or other people. And again, we feel helpless, become miserable, depressed, anxious, angry, and etc. So bad things, right? So this does not mean that we become a vegetable and accept whatever happens to us. It's more like the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So here, I leave you with this, right? So this is the end. So if you want to grow in wisdom, right, it's a great philosophy, following Epictetus' philosophy. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy to do. So this is what you would need to do. When something unpleasant or bad happens, it's raining, you know, I forgot my umbrella, ask yourself what control you had over it. If you did not have any control over it, accept it. I have no over control if it's raining, right? No control. However, you know, so don't blame yourself, get angry, get distraught, get depressed, etc. But if you did have some control over it, learn from the experience. Should have brought an umbrella, right? Yeah, I have control over that. And then change your behavior to avoid the unpleasant situation or event in the future. So what do you think about applying this philosophy in your daily life? Since we're out of time, I'll let you think for yourself, right? And thank you very much. I think we're out of time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And something that's been on my mind recently is how one of the things which we don't have any control over, which people obsess about, is how they compare with others.
Yes.
And the comparison with others, it's such a foolhardy fiction, because you can compare yourself with anyone, and if you can just choose whether you want to compare yourself with someone who's better off or worse off, or better at something or worse at something, or got more publications, got less publications. The whole thing's a nonsense, but yet we do it so much. And you really can't control that, because you can't control how other people do on whatever you're comparing, thing you're trying to compare yourself on. But it's so hard to let go of. But if you can, it really is astonishingly liberating. And as someone said, if it's me versus me, that's a better. I can't control if I'm better than someone else, but I can control if I'm better at this than I was last year. Anyway, well, let's have our break now. So it's 15:53 by my clock. So we will restart in 10 minutes. So we're slightly behind for our next session, but only by 3 minutes. So that would be grand. So we're going to have our short talk. So you've got 10 minutes to stretch, go outside, shout, have a drink, whatever works. See you in a minute. Right. Hi, everybody. So we will now go into our next session, which is the final session, apart from the eventual dialogue between speakers. And it's a symposium of 3 short talks. And I'm just seeing if there's anyone in the waiting room. Nope, we're all good there. So so the 3 short talks, as hopefully you'll have seen on the program, are going to be given by Marc Lucas, Kristjánsson, and Eeva Kallio. And first up is Marc. So I'll just give a quick introduction to Marc and then hand over for his talk, which I'm much looking forward to. And so Marc is Professor of Psychology at the University for Media Communication and Economics in Cologne in Germany, as well as founder of Lucas Consulting and Counseling. His main interests are in the integration of diverse fields in adult development, leadership, education, and organizational trauma, and arts-inspired qualitative research. And he's a board member of ESRAD and co-founder of the Wisdom Special Interest Group of the Society. So without further ado, over to you, Marc.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. I'll share my screen now. I hope you can see what I see now.
Yeah, I can see it's not in slideshow yet, but now it is. Perfect.
Wonderful. So, yeah, thank you. I'm excited to dive into the deep waters of wisdom and adult development with you today by mentioning some questions still to be addressed, to my knowledge, in the field of wisdom theorizing and research, doing this from the different perspectives of contributions from adult development psychology and genuine, often philosophically grounded wisdom theorizing. The current interest in wisdom in academic research and practice leads to an inter- and transdisciplinary engagement between and beyond the disciplines of philosophy, psychology, and others. With David McNally, this re-employment can be understood as a reaction to unwise realities and practices of our time. With Wendelin Küpers, it can be stated that the crises of our time are caused by the divergence of social complexity and human functional stupidity, as well as unethical practices. Ruth Seligger goes on to say that a second enlightenment, the new paradigm, will likely be endowed with phenomena of connecting, integrating, and interconnecting. It will show us new ways of dealing with complexity and show us ways in which we can accept the fact that our world is a living organism full of unpredictability and surprises. Wise action, then, is always a product as well as an antecedent of the respective emerging social paradigm and embedded in the thought patterns of its time. According to Sternberg, 3 different research directions can be distinguished in wisdom research: philosophical, as well as implicit and explicit psychological theories of wisdom. Let us begin our quest and questioning with a pre-modern wisdom philosophy. Nicholas of Cusa was a German philosopher, theologian, cardinal, mathematician, and physicist. His thinking revolved around the mystic concept of wisdom as the dialectical collapsing of opposites into a unity in which the contradictions between what seemed incompatible are possible to resolve, like Salber's later secular morphology of the soul. In 1450, in the dialogue Idiota de Sapientia, Nicholas turned to the subject of reasoning, doing this in sharp contrast to the scholastic Aristotelian-influenced university philosophy of the late Middle Ages. A layman, that is, a seemingly uneducated person from outside the university, talks about wisdom with a speaker, a rhetorically trained scholar who only gets his knowledge from books. The layman assumes the role played by Socrates in the dialogues of Plato. He explains to the speaker that his efforts to gain knowledge through books are vain and joyless. School science is cumbersome and tedious, while wisdom is easy and direct to find and full of joy. It is naturally assigned to the human intellect as its nourishment. The possibility of finding wisdom is inherent in the human intellect, but has to be developed. The wise person attains his satisfaction in his movement toward this archetype. This is God as the concept of concepts, or the absolute concept. The prerequisite for this is practicing coincidence thinking, a form of dialectical thinking, which also leads to the comprehensibility of the incomprehensible. The common pattern between Nicholas of Cusa's writings on wisdom and modern theories is that of a layman orientation and broad definition of wisdom with a vague telos, as well as the rejection of scholarly misconceptions and narrow understandings of complexities. Erich Heinz Ignaz Neumann was a German-Israeli psychoanalyst. He is regarded as the most important and, above all, most independent student of C.G. Jung. The story of the origin of consciousness was particularly popular. It is one of the works considered the basis of various psychological literature. In the origin story, Newman explains how human myths can be understood as a symbolic representation of the collective development of human consciousness and emphasizes the role of wise women in this early incarnation story. With Professor Wilhelm Salber and his metapsychology, it can be seen particularly in the wisdom of fairy tales that the soul is a supra-personal, structured shape in motion, and not a rigid collection of personality traits within individuals. In this shape, many things are always effective at the same time. They are not purely monocausal connections. Phenomena that are contradictory in themselves are not isolated findings or miscalculations. They are determining element of experience and behavior in general. The phenomena of human experience and behavior are artistic productions whose wise metamorphosis can only be discovered through further morphological processing, which illuminates these effective units that transform themselves and us to greater and wiser inclusivity instead of dissecting them. A common pattern between those phenomenologically inspired psychologists is that they see wisdom not as a mixture of personal traits, but as a collective phenomenon. Erik Erikson, the early adult developmental psychologist, assumed that human development consists of 8 stages, the last 3 of which are experienced in adulthood. The final stage is to recognize approaching death and accept it as part of the ongoing renewal of the life cycle. According to Erikson, people who have often successfully solved psychosocial problems can achieve a special insight into the meaning of their lives or existence in general. From this comes an awareness of the totality of human experience and the serenity to accept death. Wisdom now is that special insight that leads to a broad understanding of the collective role of human beings in the world at large. It should be noted that this established a tradition of approaching the concept of wisdom and researching it within psychology, which continues to have an impact today, and which enables the connection of the two branches of research, namely adult development and wisdom research. However, it remains questionable to what extent the underlying assumption is valid. The uncertainty becomes visible when citing the more recent and concerning the age-relatedness less definite definition of wisdom by Birn and Fisher, as given in the Handbook of Organizational and Managerial Wisdom, and balancing it with related but contrasting empirical findings concerning the correlation of wisdom and age in the meta-analysis by Pasupati et al. Birn and Fisher state, and I quote here, "Wisdom is the integration of the affective, cognitive, and cognitive aspects of human abilities in response to current life tasks and problems during one's lifespan. Wisdom is a balance between opposing valences of intense emotion and detachment, action and inaction, and knowledge and doubts. It tends to increase with experience and therefore age, but it is not exclusively found in old age. However, an empirically supported lifespan analysis even goes so far as to conclude that wisdom-relevant skills and wise judgment are mainly acquired between the age of 15 and 25, and not predominantly in old age." While theories of adult development, as for example the theory of ego development by Jane Levenger, still tend to describe wisdom as the result of successful late adult development, here as the 9th and latest stage of ego development, there is another problem of relating diagnostic ratings made there to wisdom and wise persons, namely the Washington University sentence completion test ratings, in contrast to the, in this sense, broader theoretical description, tend to overestimate linguistically expressed cognitive complexity to the integration of emotions, morality, and wise action. A good example is, according to Angerer, the grading of citations taken from Mein Kampf, which were graded as up to integrated, highest stage, by professional graders not informed about this in advance. Even under Kohlberg's assumption of domain-specific assessment of moral development as an aspect of adult development, and assumptions of multidimensionality of wisdom, there are still problems of measurement. In the following example, Dawson et al., for example, write, "The concept of epistemological development is useful in psychological assessment only insofar as instruments can be designed to measure it consistently, reliably, and without bias. In the psychosocial domain, most traditional stage assessment systems rely on a process of matching concepts in a scoring manual generated from a limited number of construction cases, and thus suffer from bias introduced by an overdependence on particular, mostly cognitively complex content. The correlation between performance estimates on Kohlberg's standard issue scoring system and hierarchical complexity scoring system is 0.92, impressive. Based on this and other evidence, it is concluded that a single latent trait, hierarchical complexity, is the predominant dimension assessed by the two and other systems. This means that cognitive complexity still is what defines adult development measurement to a high degree, and grading also of late and presumably wise stages. Even in genuine wisdom-oriented scales, there are still basic restrictions and test theoretical requirements that have to be stated. Self-assessment, especially in the domain of highly idealized and highly desirable concepts, such as wisdom, has to deal with the issue of response tendencies, such as social desirability, being highly probable. Rating scales and projective measures have to deal with the same issues as described above, for the adult development rating scales, such as Washington University sentence completion test and Kohlberg-related interviews, especially if they make use of a very limited set of pre-given dilemmas to be solved and rate them by written answers. Bill Torbert, a Harvard organizational psychologist, leans on the theory of ego development and describes concordantly a wise person as a leader with a late stage of ego development. While using very restricted samples of sometimes only 10 persons, he makes large assumptions about high functionality of such leaders in complex change management and attributes late-stage development usually to leaders only. Thereby, he declares wisdom as a utilizable personal resource for organizations without considering that other well-researched traits related to complexity and information processing, such as intelligence, show weaker correlations to leadership success. Baumann and Linden, in their review of literature on wisdom research, list at least 10 common wisdom skills and find otherwise lots of individual differences. Only a few theories, such as Kallio et al. Differentiate between core components of wisdom and related constructs. It remains dependent on the specific theory and often unexplained which components belong to a definition of wisdom, and besides personal preferences, what led to the specific set of defining variables. This becomes even more so in applied theories of wisdom, such as in the field of leadership, where wisdom is often treated as a kind of umbrella term for eclectic selections of personal preference. While Rooney and Cooper still describe a specific constellation of positive traits and habits of embodied wise leadership, these authors otherwise discuss reasons for their selection and raise the question of possible downsides within different organizational contexts. Most other authors do not do this. According to philosopher Raymond Panika, wisdom is a special knowledge, a common sense concept. It's the opposite of stupidity, vice, folly, or misfortune. A criterion for wisdom is joy. Unhappiness is the opposite. People are never exclusively wise or unwise, which means wisdom always refers to situated ways of thinking or acting. Few people are said to be wise, although many can see anything as wise. This can be seen as another critique of attempts of letting laymen define what wisdom is or should be. But still outside of the domain of research, labeling of thinking and acting as wise is usually done by others and not by the doer himself. Wisdom does not belong to someone. It is attributed to someone by other persons, and the attribution is maintained when useful in a situation, but it is not generalized over different situations by the one who prescribes wisdom. This makes it an interpersonal label to be discovered in a social process which could be seen as the core of an evolving collective wisdom. Thereby, such philosophical theorizing enriches the predominantly individualistic-centered perspective-taking of psychological theories of wisdom, which are not applicable here. As a result of the investigation, it must be stated that wisdom currently has more characteristics of a social contextual narrative than of an empirically proven or even comprehensible hypothetical construct, and should therefore, in order to do justice to the existing tradition and breadth of the term, be defined for the time being as a vividly and embodied, in German I would say leibhaftes and lebhaftes, undisciplined and broad theorem more than an empirical construct, constantly finding new forms which we develop and which develop us over time, based on the specific tensions stored at the cultural interfaces of the individual and society. Wisdom arises when society must redefine themselves. Then social actors look for a personified metaphor, the wise woman or man, and define him or her according to their current needs. So, if you want to define wisdom, you also must define situations of social upheaval. In this sense, wisdom research should always be context-conscious research, into the multi-causal and recursive psychosocial interrelationships of wisdom over time. That is meta-wisdom. Personified wisdom representatives are not necessarily genuinely wise themselves. They are more to be understood as open containers that call for a social search for wisdom in times of crisis and that inspire this search. However, no simple solutions are given by them. A more detailed definition of what is happening at the psychosocial interface could be added. Accordingly, psychosocial wisdom could be described as a paradoxical constellation of two components. First, learned ability for complexity-reducing, non-dogmatic self-abandonment and thus emotion-regulating and self-distancing, long-term perspective focusing on the moment from continued, often age-mitigated reflection of outsiders who are allowed to communicate in an aestheticizing, experience-centered manner. This is the psychological part, and as you see, there are many terms in this. And the second one is the social part. Interested appropriation by those who are afraid of transformation and want to find their way in a culture that allows ethical paths to a new coexistence to be created through re-illusioning, self-assuring, and reassuring attribution of desired characteristics to a person rated as unique or wise, and seen as a representation of an old archetype in a contemporary form. In this sense, thank you for being part of our collective journey to wisdom. And here are finally the 12 questions I raised for wisdom research and my references. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. With regards to those questions at the end, I assume you'll be happy to give us share slides for a PDF version to be given to everybody so they can review those in time. There's lots to digest. Anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, please feel to do so in the chat. We've only got a minute, I would say, really, given time. But if anyone would like to ask a question, fire away. Well, we have some thanks in the chat and opportunity for plenary dialogue later. But I think we're going to move on to Kristján. Excuse me. Let me just double check that Kristján, I can see you there. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, just as Kristján? Excellent. Okay, well, yes, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Just a reminder for those, you can change the view options at the top once at any time between speaker view and side-by-side view and that kind of thing. But let me briefly introduce Kristján. Another eminent contributor to the field of wisdom, Professor Kristján Kristjánsson is Professor of Character Education and Virtue Ethics at the University of Birmingham in the UK. And he has professorial roles at Boston College and University of Iceland. His interests lie in research on character and virtues at the intersection between moral philosophy, moral psychology, and moral education, and has written up various books and is currently the editor of the Journal of Moral Education. So we're honored to have you, Kristján. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Oliver. I'll share my screen.
Where are you from originally?
From Iceland originally.
From Iceland originally, right. So that's...
You can see this now, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, we're ready to rumble.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you again, Oliver, and thank you to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate. So for many hundreds of years, I mean, actually thousands of years before psychology started to explore wisdom, this was a big topic in philosophy. And it has remained a big topic in philosophy and in professional ethics as well. The concept that's being studied there is usually slightly narrower than the concept in psychology, namely it's explicitly practical wisdom or phronesis rather than wisdom in general. Unfortunately, these two debates, the psychological debate about wisdom and the philosophical and professional ethical discourse on practical wisdom, tend to run on parallel tracks without much interaction, which is a big pity. I hope this is changing now, as we could see, for example, in the presentation by Monika Ardelt recently, but so far, most of these discourses don't really cite each other very much. I will be trying to give you an overview in 15 minutes of the current discourse on practical wisdom of phronesis in moral philosophy and in professional ethics, and make some comparisons to the debate or discourse in psychology as well. So I've got quite a lot of slides. I will try to get as much information over to you in 15 minutes as I possibly can. So I will begin by defining phronesis or practical wisdom. I will introduce very briefly 5 theoretical models of phronesis. I will describe the development of the first long phronesis measure that we created in the Jubilee Center in Birmingham. And then the development of the second phronesis measure that we are working on now, and we haven't published that material yet. I will be mentioning a possible network model of phronesis, and then I will be talking about phronesis and flourishing, which relates also to the findings that Monika presented earlier about the relationship between practical wisdom and flourishing, and I will add a final comment about how our conceptualization of phronesis seems to add value above the moral foundation theory proposed by Jonathan Haidt. So phronesis or practical wisdom is a concept that goes back all the way to Aristotle. He defined it as an intellectual meta-virtue which guides the moral virtues, feeding on character traits cultivated in the young through habituation. Phronesis, after it comes into play, and Aristotle never tells us exactly when, probably in adolescence or early adulthood, it re-evaluates those traits critically. And the core function of phronesis is to adjudicate the relative weight of different virtues in complex situations and to help the agent reach a measured verdict about what to feel and do in light of flourishing or eudaimonia, the ultimate good and unconditional end of human beings. So in very short form, Aristotle's definition of practical wisdom is excellence in ethical decision-making. And you can already see why this is slightly narrower than the broader definition of wisdom in psychology, which is not only about ethical decision-making. So a really handy metaphor that we often use is to think of phronesis as the conductor of a symphony orchestra. And in the orchestra, you've got these 4 instrument groups, the moral virtues like compassion, intellectual virtues like curiosity or critical thinking, civic virtues like social justice, and performance virtues like resilience and grit. And then if there's a conflict between them, phronesis conducts the orchestra and makes sure that the sound that comes from the orchestra as a whole is harmonious. This is a slightly misleading metaphor because it assumes a kind of a hierarchical model, but as I will explain later, it's maybe more helpful to think of phronesis and all the instrument groups as nodes in a big network rather than a conductor versus instrument players. Now, the model that we've been working with in Birmingham is a standard Aristotelian model. I just want to make clear to you that in philosophy and professional ethics, there are at least 4 other models competing for allegiance. There is the Italian Aritai model. There is a limitativist model, which says that phronesis is a redundant concept. We just don't need it at all. Then there's the McIntyrean model based on the theories of the philosopher Alistair McIntyre, and then there's a postmodern model, which sees phronesis as kind of intuitive artistry, completely atheoretical. I will only be talking about the Aristotelian model in this presentation. That's the one we've been working with, and not only us in the Jubilee Center, also other philosophers and people within professional ethics as well. Now, there has been a lot of buzz about phronesis, especially in professional ethics in the last 30 years. But like I said, it's mostly run on a parallel track to research on wisdom in psychology. until maybe the famous Grossman 2020 study, which defines wisdom as morally sort of informed perspectival metacognition, which seems to sort of bring the wisdom concept in psychology closer to the practical wisdom model of excellence in ethical decision making. But despite his interest in professional ethics and in moral philosophy for not only 30 years, actually much longer than that, before 2019, there was no clear conceptualization of phronesis available, and there was no instrument to measure it. So we created a conceptualization, and we created the first instrument to measure phronesis, and you can read about that in that model in these two papers. So I'll tell you something about how we define phronesis and the first instrument we created, and then the second one. So we just went back to the drawing board. We just basically read Aristotle's texts. We just went to the original source to see what exactly he meant by practical wisdom of phronesis. He wrote a lot about it, not only in his ethics, but also in his politics. And we sort of identified four main components, or factors, or functions of phronesis. There's moral perception, the ability to see what the problem is, what the conflict is, for example, between honesty and loyalty to friends. There is the emotion regulation aspect of it, being able to regulate your emotions so you are not too, in a way, wired up to take a good decision. There is the moral identity or blueprint component, having some kind of a vision of what kind of a life you want to lead as an individual or as a professional, as a medical doctor or a police officer or teacher. And then there is the moral adjudication or integration, where you look at all the pros and cons of the different options on the table and try to reach a decision about what's the best thing to do. So we created a measure which looked at the relationship between these four factors of phronesis that Aristotle identified, and sort of self-described moral behavior, prosocial behavior. And we wanted to see whether the phronesis construct, understood as a second order factor, explained or predicted moral behavior above and beyond the individual four components. And when we put this into a structural equation modeling format, it turned out that after controlling for the big five traits, actually phronesis as a second order factor did predict moral behavior quite well, which was a nice surprise to us, because we also didn't really know what to expect when we did this study. There were lots of problems with this long measure that we created during COVID. We didn't do any exploratory factor analysis. We just began with confirmatory factor analysis, to taking for granted these four components from Aristotle. We were working with very small samples, only 250 16-year-olds and 250 18-year-olds from the UK. The measure we created was very long, took 45 minutes to complete. This is much too long if you want to use it for pre and post testing before and after an intervention. And then also the outcome variable moral behavior, prosocial behavior, is very un-Aristotelian, because Aristotle wasn't really interested in what we do, but rather why we do it. And there was no exploration of association with flourishing, which you need to do as an Aristotelian, because, I mean, for Aristotle, the main purpose of phronesis is to help us lead a flourishing life. And then also we didn't look at how this plays out in professional contexts. So we decided to create a shorter, more wieldy measure, and we are working on that data set now. This is quite big, so we managed to get representative samples both from the UK and the USA, so quite large samples, representative in the sense that they model the UK and USA in terms of gender, location, age, etc. And we also did this with 3 groups of professionals from the US: medical practitioners, entrepreneurs, and teachers. So we have quite a large data set to play with. And we managed to create a much shorter measure, which only takes about 15 minutes to complete. So when we sort of factor analyzed what we found, we did find the 4 original factors from Aristotle, but we also found a number of different sub-factors. For example, for moral perception, we found situational moral irrelevance and relevance, virtue identification, for moral emotion, both positive and negative moral emotion, and also emotional regulation. For moral identity, moral self-relevance and aspired moral identity. And then moral adjudication, we divide it up into moral deliberation and moral integration. So this is the model fit in the US and the UK samples. As you can see, the model fit is pretty good. It's better for some reason in the US sample though than in the UK sample. These are the 4 original factors or components of phronesis, and then the sub-factors that we found. Actually, when we started to play with the data, we realized that a hierarchical model might not be the best way to account for this, the model of the conductor and the orchestra. So we did network analysis as well on the data, and we figured out what would be the most important nodes in this phronesis network. And this is an important finding, especially for educational purposes, because you will probably want to begin if you are trying to teach practical wisdom. You want to begin with the strongest nodes in the network, which there are moral self-relevance and deliberation, identity, aspiration. So the moral identity components seem to be the strongest, statistically the strongest predictors in the model. We also so this is a finding from these 4,000 participants in the US and UK combined. So we looked at the correlation between the sub-factors and the factors of practical wisdom and the 6 factors in the widely used the widely used flourishing model from the Harvard Flourishing Center. And you can see, as Aristotle predicted and as Monika found out in her sample in Florida, I mean, you can see quite strong correlations in most cases between the factors and sub-factors of phronesis and the 6 factors of flourishing in the Harvard model. The only big exception is the factor or in the Harvard model of sort of economic well-being or economic stability. So the lesson to be learned there is that, unfortunately, practical wisdom is not going to make you rich. We also looked at whether our model would predict various sort of individual differences above and beyond the moral foundation model, which is maybe the most widely used one in moral psychology at the moment to measure people's moral competences, the Jonathan Haidt model. And as you can see there, when we looked at Machiavellianism and narcissism and psychopathy and sadism, sort of the dark tetrad, we obviously wanted phronesis to correlate negatively with those aspects, and it did. And when we looked at phronesis as a hierarchical model, it did add some value, but especially when we looked at it as a network model, it started to sort of explain and predict things much better than the moral foundation theory does. So this finally is the sort of the developmental model that we are trying to sort of develop at the moment. So we realized that the model that we began with the 4 factors from Aristotle was too simple, and we are trying now to sort of create a developmental model of phronesis. And as you can see, actually there are quite large similarities between this model and the model that Judith Gluck introduced you this morning. So this is what we are working on at the moment, sort of to finalize the analysis of the data set and to get these findings peer reviewed so that we can publish the instrument online. It's 15-minute instrument, and people can use it if they want to run some interventions in professional ethics classes or in high schools, then they can do the pre and post test to see if there is an improvement in ethical decision making. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kristján. So with a question from me with regards to the phronesis questionnaire, you put some items up, but it was the way the items was phrased on the screen was that they were referring to people in general. Is it are you asking the question the person filling out the questionnaire to rate their own phronesis?
In some case, it all depends on the 4 components. I mean, like when we are asking question about emotion regulation, about negative and positive emotions, we ask about their own emotions, how they would react to certain situations. Would you feel good about this, or would you feel bad about this? But in other cases, I mean, not all the measures are self-report measures. So we also have questions about moral dilemmas, about other people who do certain things or don't do certain things in certain situations. And we ask them, what are the different considerations or virtues that are coming into conflict in this situation? Can you identify what the virtues are, etc.? And then what would be a good or a bad, decision to take in these situations? So this is a combination of performance questions and self-report questions about yourself.
Okay, and so how many questions are there in the 15-minute version or the?
I think that about between 50 and 60. I haven't got the instrument with me at the moment, but something like that, yeah.
Okay, and so some it's just self-report, and some you provide a scenario and they have to check what they think would be the most frenetic solution, if that's an adjective. Yes,
indeed. And we did work on this together with Steve Thoma, who's a sort of prominent neo-Kohlbergian in the States, who has been working on the DIT and ICM measures, and we did utilize some ideas from the neo-Kohlbergians about how to use moral dilemmas to sort of evaluate moral competence.
All right, thanks. I'll just check the chat. So yeah, if anyone would like to ask a question, there's some thanks in the chat. No questions per se. Feel free to put up your virtual hand. And so one more question from me, Kristján. You mentioned, so is it published yet, this, or is it yet to be published?
So the long phronesis measure, I mean the model, the justification of the model was published in Review of General Psychology, and the longer phronesis, original longer phronesis instrument is explained and published in Personality and Individual Differences, but we haven't published the shorter version.
Okay.
Yet, the big.
Could you provide the link to the article with the long version in the chat?
Sure, it's already actually in the. Okay, yeah, I can do that.
That'd be great. Just and sometime in the next 5 minutes would be great. Sure. I'm sure people would be interested to check that out. And I'm sure, as you say, it's in your references, but the link will be great. So that's that. Thank you so much, Kristján, and great to hear about your work with the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues, which sounds like a very important institution. So moving on, we have our final speaker for today, which is Eeva K. Kallio. Eeva used to be president of ESRAD.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
And Eeva's going to be talking about who says what is wisdom and why. And I'll just briefly introduce Eeva while she's getting herself ready. So she's an associate adjunct professor at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, and she's interested in wisdom and adult development, and she leads the wisdom and learning team at the Finnish Institute for Educational Research at the University of Jyväskylä. She's edited several books on adult development psychology, and currently involved in an Academy of Finland project called Wisdom in Practice. So over to you, Eeva, and Kristján, if you want to just come out of screen share now.
Thank you. I'll try to share. Do you see?
Not well. It says in the middle that you started screen sharing up. And now we can see your screen.
Okay, good. So thank you for your invitation. It has been a great pleasure to listen all these presentations. I have really.
Sorry, hold on, Eeva. Yeah, so you may need to reshare on the slide share mode. We can just see the PowerPoint version at the moment.
Do you mean this?
Yes. So have you gone into slideshare mode?
Hit this.
I don't know what this is. I'm just asking if you're in slideshare mode at the moment.
I'm not following. Sorry.
So at the moment we can see your slides, but in the editable PowerPoint view, we can't see your slides in slideshow mode, which is how we would want to see them.
Can you start the presentation, Eeva?
There we go. Okay, all good.
Okay, all right, okay. So thank you for invitation, and I'm really been delighted to listen all this presentation. It is really been a happy moment to me. I have been very interested in this topic for decades in a way or other, but only in later 6 or 7 years I have been more practically involved in wisdom project in our university. There are 3 research groups of wisdom in our institute. It's Finnish Institute for Educational Research in University of Jyväskylä, and actually there's a 4th one in the mathematical natural sciences faculty, which is focused on sustainable development and wisdom. But I'm the leader of the wisdom and learning team, and I'm also involved in wisdom and practice, a project which is an international project, very large one, and where Kristjánsson is also involved, funded by Research Council of Finland, which is extremely difficult funding to get. And we also have eco-social sustainability and education team, and these 3 teams are doing research in the same time of wisdom. So I wrote my abstract with these questions on my mind, but you can see there was some kind of change of my thoughts during the process. I agree with Kristján, who mentioned something about a difficult relationship between psychological and philosophical wisdom research. And I think there's a huge problem of concepts in psychology. As I started here in my abstract, I thought that I'm doing some description of the wisdom as a human ideal, which has been discussed by some philosophers, for example, Tiberius and Swartwood, by Mascolo, who is a psychologist actually, and John Kekes. They think that actually psychological wisdom research is looking for some kind of human ideal or something, some kind of picture of a human being, which includes potential for some kind of ideal behavior. And as has been many times already said during these sessions, it is assumed that wisdom is developmental, and often it has been named as high-level phase of human progress and learning. But we disagree here in our research group, because one of our researchers is doing already collected data, and we have been writing articles about children's wisdom in preschools, in forest preschools in Finland, how they express their practical wisdom in forest environments. So this was my first base question when I started to write my abstract. But then I noticed I'm changing my focus a bit. I changed my focus on the scholars who are doing research on wisdom and which kind of values actually the scholars have in their wisdom theorization. So first I was here as a wisdom as ideal construct, what human being could be in its best, which of course is value-laden term, but there are also value-laden terms and very much many assumptions scholars have made every time we start our studies of wisdom. So the problem of concepts in psychology. So I find there's some kind of misunderstanding in psychological researchers about what is philosophy and what is philosophical method. It is conceptual investigation of psychological concepts. Which concepts are used, what they actually mean, which are the problems in their use, and what is hidden in the terms, and questions like that. And very often is claimed that philosophy it's just speculation. It's not so important. But I claim that it's never just speculation. That's why we have two philosophers actually in our group, in our research groups, and they also adult educational people and developmental psychologists and sociologists and like that. And we selected philosophers because they are pretty clever to dig up our tacit assumptions of the theoretical concepts scholars are using, and actually every human being when using any concept is tied to these similar tacit assumptions. I strongly recommend this book by Lerner, the fourth edition, Concepts and Theories of Human Development, because wisdom is part of human development, as we have seen many times during these sessions. I think I can use this book as a backbone to my presentation. And this is a very important book, actually. This is totally theoretical, and it opens, for example, the concept of development. What does it mean? Originally, the concept of development refers to the biological development only, and afterwards it has also spread to the other more psychological fields of study. And the first chapter of this book is actually named on the primacy of concepts and theories, which says a lot. And in this book, Lerner show this picture, this image. You can see in the bottom of the page there's data, and above it there are many layers like methods, topic-specific theories, mid-range theories, grand theories. For example, Skinner's behaviorism is included in this level. And above them all are these big paradigms, which, of course, from Thomas Kuhn's theory of paradigm and system changes in the science history. The Pepper has written a book about world hypothesis, which is also a very important paradigmatic book. Leonard claims that research is always tied to values or preferences or assumptions. As he put it like this: everything a scientist does involves at least 3 points. First, assumptions about the nature of the subject matter, in this case, wisdom. Secondly, preferences for the topic of the study within the subject matter. And third, preferences for the methods of study. And I ask here, do subjective background matter in scientific studies of wisdom? And of these three questions, which kind of effect they may have on research, he claims that all scientific research, no matter what topic it bears, is underlain by a particular philosophy of science or of human beings. The developmental scientist querying me could then ask where my assumptions came from. And he continues, somebody else, some other scientists can disagree with my findings. And he goes even further. He claims that a development is actually a theoretical concept. It is a concept of postulation. One study or development begins with some implicit or explicit concept or of what development is. And you can change the term development, of course, with this wisdom. And still he continue, and he rises up this template question. There are conceptual differences because different scientists are committed to distinct philosophical and theoretical beliefs about the nature of the world and of human life. And I think this is very important regarding wisdom, what we think about human life and what we think about human being. He criticizes, of course, this old Cartesian paradigm, which is associated with reductionist, essentialist, and mechanistic meta theories. And he rise up another possibility as he claimed it or named it dynamic system-oriented approach of the world. I asked if is wisdom a phenomenon which can be reduced either of these two possibilities, or is there something else? For example, what is the role of subjects' conscious self-direction or agency here? It's not included in either of these. I think it may be implicit in the second one, but not in the first one. And there are also further questions in psychological wisdom research, such as in developmental psychology in general. I think somebody already mentioned about this continuity and discontinuity question. Is one's behavior or decisions continuous once detected, or can they disappear? Also, openness versus closeness. Is wisdom possible at all to be restricted to certain definitions? Is it modifiable if once as it has once occurred? Is it context dependent? I have been reading Viktor Frankl lately, and he's describing one case study or mental hospital. I was wondering, was it in Vienna or somewhere? Which used the Nazis' program for eliminate all mental ill persons. And the chief doctor there has been extremely sadistic. And later, he has been imprisoned in Russia. And in that prison, he has been showed the most empathic and compassionate and very good features of himself. So I question, is it always something, or is it context dependent? There's also a question on nature and nurture. I think Igor Grossman has lately evolutionary or biological reasons. There can be, or which kind of status they have in theory formation, or is it all also nurtured, and in which way, and where is the agent, where is the person who is conducting wise actions? Is it universal or is non-universal phenomenon? And which kind of methods we should use, or should we use them, or the possibly most number of the best number of methods to get an appropriate picture of the wisdom. I'm wondering why phenomenological first-person perspective studies hasn't done so much, but these third-person perspective are well used in this field. I understand it. Of course, it's a common it's common current situation in scientific research. They are needed. And the final thing I want to add here, I'm not sure, but if you are from German speaking area, you know the term Bildung in German. It means some kind of self-edification and civilization process and through education. It has, in Finnish, there's a term sivistys, very close. Sivistys and sisu are two important terms in Finland. And sivistys has lately been very popular, and actually it is very close. It's old term, about 200 years old here in Finland, but it's now demonstrated it's quite close to the word wisdom, what is understood in wisdom. And finally, I don't know how much I have time still, but I just show this picture. I think Judith probably like this. I'm going to dig these things deeper. We are creating and submitted our holistic wisdom model, and we are waiting for the reviews of them. And actually, we have created a questionnaire of learning of wisdom. It is as a manuscript, not yet published, and many other empirical studies are coming based on our holistic model, but we are waiting for the publication of it before giving any information about that. And here are the refs. So thank you very much giving me time. Any questions are welcome, and any critical comments, of course, more than welcome.
Thank you, Eeva. So yes, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the chat or put up your Zoom hand. Okay, well, we will reconvene shortly for a plenary discussion with our 5 speakers. So what I suggest is that it's 4 minutes past 5 now. So if you could all be back at 15:15, and then we'll have a dialogue where our speakers can ask each other questions, and you can ask them questions. And I think that'll be a really nice way to round off the day. There's been a lot of information and a lot of wisdom, dare I say it. So I'll see you all in 10 minutes for the plenary dialogue. Yeah, thanks to all the speakers, and we'll see you all in 10 minutes for the final dialogue or the plenary chat. Okay, see you shortly.